Of these first 12 companies, only United States Leather is entirely defunct. Well, that's interesting. Let's see what we can find out here. Lowell Birrell, one of the greatest stock manipulations of the 20th century? Let's see what's going on here. Not a single hit on YouTube about this guy? Perfect. Lowell Birrell was one of 5 children in a family of modest means in Indiana. Luckily, he was smart, exceedingly so. After entering Syracuse University several years early, he went on to Michigan Law School, graduating at just 21 with a 3.6 GPA, even though he was employed throughout his studies as a stenographer in order to pay for his tuition. As a classmate described it, he didn't read in the ordinary sense. He just looked at something page by page and grasped it instantly. His ascent continued as he was hired by Cadwalader, Wickersham, and Taft, then and now one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. Lowell was suddenly making real money, but even after a year where he made $75,000, which is an insane amount when contrasted with the $900 per year his father had earned when he was young, he wanted more. His opportunity to shift from earning tens of thousands to millions began in 1938 when he gained control of a company called Fidelio Beer, and then really accelerated in 1944. In that year, a terminally ill business mogul named Cecil Parker Stewart met with a Peruvian doctor seeking alternative treatment on the advice of Birrell. Afterwards, he felt himself recuperating, and in the glow of this miracle named Lowell a director of every one of his companies. Cecil ended up dying as expected, but Lowell's power remained. Using his immense intellect, knowledge of the SEC's rulebook gained during his legal career, and coincidentally its weaknesses, and a stable of newly acquired companies, Lowell set to work. The nature of his crimes is almost certainly why he isn't a household name like Charles Ponzi, or the feature of a motion picture like Wolf of Wall Street or Catch Me If You Can. If anything, he was Marty Byrde of Ozark, but without the cartel to make things interesting. An SEC spokesman described him as the most brilliant manipulator of corporations in modern times, and Life magazine noted of him and his mid-century cohort of fraudsters, their schemes were imaginative, bold, and frequently characterized by brain-numbing complexity. Going on to write of Birrell specifically, he was undoubtedly the most gifted of all this predatory crew. In the opinion of many who have officially investigated his activities, he has wrecked more corporations, duped more investors, and engineered the theft of more money than any other American this century. From what I was able to gather, his schemes relied on a couple key regulatory blind spots. First, at the time, the SEC had a rule that if you issue stock to get shares of another company, it doesn't have to be registered. This seems insane, but basically you could issue lots of stock without anyone knowing about it, well, except for the company you were transacting with, but since Lowell normally controlled companies on both sides of the transactions, then regular shareholders might not know that they were being diluted. Another loophole was that the SEC did not have jurisdiction over insurance companies, so if they were holding stock, the value of that stock couldn't be questioned. If shareholders of the public companies ever thought something fishy was going on with the assets that were being put on their balance sheets, Birrell could have one of his insurance companies buy them at their inflated price and stash them away. The insurance companies didn't care because since their books went unquestioned and the policies they were able to write were based on their holdings, it didn't really matter. So shares are flying every which way between companies. Their values are subject to little more than Birrell's imagination. But how can he get any money out? If he sells to the public, then he does have to register the shares. As best I can tell, he had 3 ways to do this. First, he could sell watered stock. Have you ever looked at an SEC filing and skimmed over a portion describing the par value of a company at some tiny fraction of a dollar? Lowell Birrell is staring back at you. The par value of a stock used to mean something similar to how the par value of a bond still does. It was the minimum value a share should be worth. The term watered stock comes from a practice in the cattle industry where before a steer was to be offered at auction, its owner loaded it up with water to increase its weight. In watered stock, par value is increased by loading a balance sheet with assets of dubious value. Birrell could stuff a company with unregistered shares that merely appeared to have value, then register and sell this watered stock to the public. Due to lawsuits over par values being misrepresented, companies took to using par values so low that they'd never possibly be accused of inflating their value. Second, he could sell unregistered stock to the public. Life magazine did their best to diagram this trick through a cartoon. The gist of it is that by sending it through a series of intermediaries, at some point, both the seller and the buyer have no idea that they're taking part in a criminal transaction. But by looking at just the beginning and ending points, it boils down to Birrell selling stock and receiving the funds for it. Third, and this is easily my favorite because it's just a pure loophole that seems to have been legal at least at the time, Lowell would take out a big loan and pledge company stock as collateral. Then, at first chance he had, he'd default on the loan. The bank issuing the loan would then sell the shares to recover their principal. Since neither Birrell nor the company were the ones actually issuing shares to be sold to the public, they couldn't get in trouble for selling the unregistered shares. In time, Birrell becomes wealthy, but this also means he's burning more and more investors. During a chance encounter in a New York restaurant, he's said to have remarked, "You put money in one of my companies? That was a mistake. Nobody makes any money on my companies except me." The government catches on, but they're slow. Birrell is in Cuba and later Brazil. But let's rewind. Every article that you read about Lowell Birrell will include 2 things. First, they'll stress how intelligent he is. Second, he lived lavishly. He might have been half Marty Bird, but he was new money and he partied accordingly. He had an estate in Pennsylvania where he had rows of slot machines, a full-sized fire engine, and a pleasure boat on a man-made lake that was much too small for it. He offered a woman $1,000 to strip in front of a pack of reporters while being showered in the oil pouring out of one of his wells. His wife rented him an elephant for Christmas, which he proceeded to feed scotch. If he was off-premise in New York, he often napped in phone booths or on pool tables before suddenly recuperating and going about the next day's business like nothing at all. He was an elite-level alcoholic. In Brazil, Lowell continues to have a good time. He's interviewed about all the economic opportunity he sees, and Brazil is in no hurry to deport a man with millions to invest. Eventually, they're forced to jail him after learning he entered with a fake passport, but even then, he shares living quarters with one of the prison officials, buys himself a premium mattress, and has meals delivered from the outside at expensive restaurants. Finally, with funds running low, he returns to the US. Well, that and Brazil was going to enact an extradition treaty with the US since they realized that they were becoming sort of a haven for stock swindlers. Before leaving, he stated, "I've got nothing to worry about. It's just a complicated business problem. People just don't understand anything about high finance." He served several short sentences totaling 52 months. Bernie Madoff was sentenced to 150 years. On the other hand, Frank Abagnale of Catch Me If You Can and Jordan Belfort of Wolf of Wall Street each were out in 2 and were sought after on the speaking circuit. All 3 of them got movies. But at least now there's this video. Thanks for watching, guys.